"Dad, tomorrow the court will officially declare that you're no longer mentally competent." She said it quietly. Calmly. Almost gently. I was standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hand when I realized my fingers were no longer obeying me. The cup slipped and shattered on the floor, just as easily as my life was breaking apart. "We've already prepared everything," she added. "The doctors. The lawyers. The documents." And in that moment, the most terrifying truth became clear to me. I wasn't sick. I was in the way. And my own children had decided to remove me. If real life can turn this quietly brutal, then these stories matter. Stay with me. Subscribe, I read every comment, and the next part changes everything. That morning had started without warning. I woke before the alarm, the way I always did, my body still loyal to a routine no one else needed anymore. The house was quiet, not peacefully so, but with that hollow stillness that settles after years of voices have moved on. Pipes clicked somewhere in the walls. The refrigerator hummed like it was thinking. I made coffee in my old metal thermos, the one I used to take into the workshop. It still smelled faintly of oil and sawdust, no matter how many times I washed it. I liked that smell. It reminded me that my hands had once built things that stayed standing. I put on the same jacket I'd worn for years. The elbows were shiny from wear, the zipper crooked. My wife used to threaten to throw it away. After she died, I stopped replacing things. Laura had invited me to dinner the night before. "Just a family dinner, Dad," she'd said. "Mark will come. The kids too." Mark had texted a thumbs-up emoji. Nothing more. I stood in the hallway tying my shoes and caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked normal. Tired, maybe. Older, yes. But not lost. Not confused. Not broken. I remember thinking, maybe tonight will feel like a family again. The drive to Laura's house was uneventful. I noticed the same grocery store on the corner, the same faded sign for a dry cleaner that had been closing soon for a decade. Life, apparently, had decided to keep going without asking me. Laura's house smelled like baked apples and cinnamon when I walked in. There was apple pie on the table, still warm. The television was on, volume low, some cartoon flickering across the screen. My grandson Ethan sat on the floor laughing, completely absorbed. That laugh did something to my chest. It loosened it. For a while, everything felt almost normal. We ate. We talked about small things. Weather. School. A neighbor's new car. I told a story about a machine I'd fixed years ago, and Mark smiled politely at the right moments. But I didn't notice what mattered. I didn't notice how often Laura checked her phone, her thumb moving quickly, nervously. I didn't notice how Mark kept twisting his keys in his hand, over and over, metal clicking softly against metal. I didn't notice how the conversation never quite landed anywhere real. I thought the tension was my fault. I thought it was age, or grief, or the way families slowly forget how to sit together without effort. When dessert was finished, Laura stood up and cleared the plates too quickly. "Dad," she said, reaching under the table, "there's something we need to talk about." She placed a folder in front of me. It was thick. Too thick. That was the moment the day finally caught up with me. And the morning I'd thought was ordinary quietly disappeared forever. After dessert, Laura didn't pour more coffee. She didn't offer me another slice of pie. She just stood, gathered the plates with quick hands, and kept glancing toward the hallway like she was waiting for a signal. Mark helped her in a way that looked practiced, too coordinated for something as simple as clearing a table. He stacked the dishes, wiped a spot on the counter that wasn't dirty, then returned to the dining room and sat down with his shoulders tense and his knees angled toward the door. Ethan was still on the floor with his cartoons, but the laughter had thinned out. Even he could feel the air changing. "Dad," Laura said again, softer this time, as if softness could make the next thing acceptable. "We need to talk." She came back holding a folder. Not a paper envelope. Not a casual stack of bills. A real folder, thick, stiff, the kind lawyers carry into rooms where people lose things. She set it in front of me and kept her fingers on it for a moment, like she was making sure it didn't slide away. Mark didn't look at my face. He looked at the folder, then at my hands. Then at the folder again. "We're worried about you," Laura began. "We've been noticing things." I didn't touch it at first. I stared at it the way you stare at an animal you don't recognize in your yard, half expecting it to lunge. "Noticing what?" I asked. "Little things," she said quickly. "You repeat yourself. You forget what day it is sometimes. You leave the stove on." "I have never left the stove on," I said, and my voice came out sharper than I meant. Mark cleared his throat. "It's not an attack, Dad. It's just, your safety." There it was. The word people use when they want to take something from you and feel noble about it. Laura opened the folder and turned it toward me, like she was presenting evidence in a trial. On top was a medical evaluation. My name was typed neatly at the top. My date of birth. My address. Under that, paragraphs of clinical language, phrases that sounded polite but felt like a knife. Possible cognitive decline. Vulnerability to exploitation. Recommendation for guardianship evaluation. My stomach tightened so hard it felt like someone had tied a rope inside me and pulled. I flipped the page. A letterhead from a law office. Another page with a court form. Then a document titled Petition for Appointment of Guardian and Conservator. I had seen enough legal paper in my life to recognize what it meant. This wasn't a conversation. It was a procedure. "You went to a lawyer," I said. Laura held my gaze for half a second and then looked down at her own hands. "We had to." "Behind my back," I said. Mark finally spoke, measured and calm, the tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "Dad, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder. As if my life was an inconvenience they were trying to manage efficiently. I kept turning pages. There were financial control forms. Lists of assets. A section asking for bank information. Another page detailing authority over property, my house, my accounts, my decisions. Who would sign for me? Who would decide where I lived? Who would approve medical care? I looked up at my daughter. "Tomorrow," I said slowly, "you are going to walk into court and tell a judge I can't manage my own life." Laura's eyes were glossy. "Not with grief. With performance. It's for your own good," she said. "Dad, you have money now, and that makes you a target. We're trying to protect you." I almost laughed, but it didn't come out as laughter. It came out as breath, one sharp exhale through my nose, like my body was trying not to break open in front of them. Protect me. From whom? From strangers? Or from the people sitting at my table with paperwork already filled out? Ethan's cartoon changed scenes. A bright burst of sound, a silly jingle. It felt obscene against what was happening. I lowered my eyes back to the folder and saw a line that turned my blood cold. Emergency temporary guardianship requested. Emergency. Temporary. Words chosen to make it seem urgent, to make the court move fast, to keep me from having time to respond. I pushed the folder slightly away from me, as if it were contaminated. "You planned this," I said. "All of it." Mark's jaw tightened. "Planned is a strong word." Laura leaned forward, voice still controlled, still calm, still terrifying in its calmness. "Dad, if you cooperate, this can be gentle. If you fight it, the court will see you're unstable." And that was the first moment I truly understood the trap. It wasn't just that they wanted control. It was that any resistance, any anger, any disbelief, any human reaction, could be used as proof that I was exactly what they claimed I was. I looked past them, to the corner of the room where Ethan sat on the floor. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was watching us, phone in his hands, shoulders stiff, eyes darting between his mother and me like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something older and heavier. Because I suddenly knew this wasn't starting tonight. This had been building for a while. And I had been the last person in the room to realize it. I don't know what made me look away from the folder. Maybe it was the weight of those pages, or the way Laura's voice kept hovering over them like a lid being pressed down. Maybe it was the tightness in Mark's face, his jaw working as if he'd already rehearsed the part where he pretended to be sorry. But my eyes went to Ethan. He was still on the floor, phone in his hands, screen lighting his cheeks in quick flashes. His shoulders were tense, and his mouth sat half open like he'd forgotten to breathe. He wasn't watching the cartoon anymore. He was watching me. Watching his mother. Watching his father. Like a child watching a house catch fire and trying to decide which room to run to. Something in my chest pulled hard, a familiar kind of pressure that didn't belong to this evening. It belonged to another time. Another room. Another kind of silence. My heart started beating the way it had years ago, fast, stubborn, angry at being forced to notice something it didn't want to admit. And suddenly, without asking permission, my memory opened. I saw my workshop first. Not the shiny version people imagine when they hear that word. Mine was a converted garage with concrete floors that always felt cold through the soles of my shoes. The air smelled of metal, wood dust, and the faint sweetness of lubricant. There was a radio that never tuned quite right, always humming under the music like it was tired too. I built that place with my own hands. Every shelf, every bench, every hanging rack for tools. I knew where everything belonged. I could reach for a wrench in the dark and touch it on the first try. When my wife died, that workshop saved me. People like to speak about grief as if it's a wave that passes. They don't tell you about the ordinary moments, the way you reach for a second mug because you're so used to making 2 coffees, or how you turn your head to tell someone something simple and then remember there's no one there to hear it. After the funeral, after the casseroles, after the last awkward hug from the last neighbor, the house got quiet in a way that felt like a punishment. So I worked. I worked because the sound of a drill was better than the sound of my own breathing. I worked because measuring and cutting and fixing gave my hands something to do besides shake. I worked because the world still needed things repaired, even if my life didn't feel reparable. I raised Laura and Mark's mother, my wife, together, but after she was gone, it was as if the family had been lifted off its foundation and set down crooked. Everyone kept pretending it was fine as long as no one looked too closely. Laura started calling less. Mark started saying he was busy. Holidays became shorter. Conversations became thinner. And I told myself that was normal. Children grow up. They get lives. They don't sit at their parents' tables forever. But there was a difference between growing up and moving away. There was a difference between living your life and treating your father like he was an old chair you didn't know where to put. Years passed like that. Quiet years. Not tragic, not dramatic, just small. The kind that make a man shrink without noticing. Then, one afternoon, something from my past returned. It started as a letter from a law office I didn't recognize. Cream paper, heavy, expensive. I remember holding it in my workshop with dirty hands, reading it twice because my eyes didn't want to accept what it said. A company had been using a design I developed decades earlier, an old mechanism I created for a machine I'd repaired and improved in my early years, when money was tight and I was hungry for the pride of making something better than it had been. Back then, I'd filed for a patent mostly out of stubbornness. A man I worked with told me it wasn't worth it. Nobody's going to steal from you, he laughed, like theft only happened to important people. But they had. And the law office believed they could prove it. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't even tell my wife when she was alive, because it felt like foolish hope, the kind you don't say out loud unless you want life to punish you for dreaming. But the case moved forward anyway, slowly, like all legal things do: meetings, documents, timelines, experts who spoke in numbers instead of feelings. The day the settlement came through, I sat at my kitchen table alone with a check that looked unreal. I remember the paper trembling slightly between my fingers. $40 million. Not a prize. Not a miracle. A correction. A debt finally paid. I could have called Laura that day. I could have called Mark. I could have announced it like news, like something to celebrate. But I didn't. I don't know if that makes me wise or foolish. Maybe it was both. I wanted to know something first. I wanted to know who my children were without my money. Because I already knew who they were with my time. With my love. With my patience. And those things had become easy for them to accept, almost invisible. So I stayed quiet. I kept living the same way. Same house. Same thermos. Same jacket. Same workshop. I didn't buy anything grand. I didn't move. I didn't boast. I didn't even replace the broken kitchen tile my wife used to complain about. A few months later, Laura started calling more. At first it felt tender. Like she missed me. Like maybe grief had softened her. "Dad, how are you?" She'd ask, voice suddenly warm. "I was thinking about you today," she'd say, as if thinking was a gift. Mark brought the kids over more often. Hugs lasted longer. Smiles came quicker. They brought wine and pastries. They laughed louder at my jokes. And I remember standing in my doorway watching them leave one afternoon, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I wanted to believe that was the reason. But now, sitting at Laura's table with a folder of court papers in front of me, watching Ethan's shoulders pulled tight like a bowstring, that hope turned sour in my throat. Because the truth was sliding into place, piece by piece, with a coldness that didn't feel like age. It felt like understanding. And as I stared at my grandson, still silent, still tense, I realized the money hadn't changed me. It had revealed them. At first, everything looked like care. That is the most dangerous part. After the money surfaced, quietly, without announcements, their attention didn't arrive all at once. It came gently, like water seeping under a door. Calls that used to come once a month started coming once a week. Then every few days. "Dad, just checking in. We miss you. You sound tired, are you sleeping enough?" Laura began bringing groceries when she visited. Mark fixed a loose step on my porch. The kids hugged me harder when they left. Gifts appeared, new slippers, vitamins, a smartwatch I didn't ask for. I told myself this was love catching up. But love doesn't count. They counted everything. Laura would glance around my house while we talked, eyes moving in small calculations. She asked innocent questions that weren't innocent at all. "Do you still keep everything in one account? Did you ever think about downsizing? What would you even do with all this space alone?" Mark started bringing up investments at dinner. Not advice, suggestions dressed as concern. "You should let money work for you, Dad. Keeping it sitting there isn't smart. My friend knows a guy." I said no. Politely. Casually. The way you say no when you don't think refusal has consequences. That was when the tone shifted. Not sharply. Not enough to accuse. Just enough to notice. Laura sighed more often. Mark rubbed his forehead when I disagreed. Conversation stalled when I didn't answer the way they wanted. Then came the first request. "Dad, would you consider selling the house?" Laura asked one afternoon, too lightly. "It's a lot for you to manage." "This house." The one I built shelves in. The one my wife died in. The one that still carried her voice in the walls. I'm fine here, I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. Just a thought. After that, the requests stacked quietly. Maybe invest in Mark's business, just a small amount. You should really update your will. Put things in order, just in case. Each sentence ended the same way. For peace of mind. For safety. For the family. A neighbor noticed before I did. Mrs. Henley from 2 houses down caught me one morning while I was taking out the trash. She leaned closer than necessary and lowered her voice. They look at you like a bank, she said. Not like a father. I laughed it off. People always talk. People misunderstand. But the words stayed. Then came the subtle isolations. Laura started answering questions for me when we were together. Mark interrupted if I spoke too long. The kids were ushered out of the room when conversations turned serious. You're tired, Dad. Let us handle it. You don't need to stress. Stress. Another useful word. Passwords changed without warning. Mail went missing. A banker called once to confirm something I hadn't authorized. That's when I stopped dismissing the feeling in my gut. I checked my accounts. Activity I didn't recognize. Access requests sent in my name. Appointment scheduled that I hadn't agreed to. I asked Laura directly. She smiled like I'd hurt her. Why are you being so suspicious? That question told me everything. Concern doesn't ask why you're suspicious. It asks what you're afraid of. That night, I changed every password. Every PIN. Every access point. I froze what I could and locked down the rest. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. The next morning, Laura called 3 times before noon. Mark showed up unannounced. You didn't tell us you were making changes, he said, carefully calm. You didn't tell me you were making plans, I replied. That was the first time silence stretched between us without pretending. Then the words changed. You're confused. You're forgetting things. You're not thinking clearly. Not worried anymore. Certain. That's when I started digging. And what I found made the folder on Laura's table feel inevitable. They hadn't just prepared. They had rehearsed. I didn't raise my voice at the table. I couldn't afford to. Not because I was afraid of them, but because I understood, finally, what kind of game they were playing. If I got angry, I was unstable. If I cried, I was confused. If I defended myself, I was paranoid. So I did the only thing an old man can do when younger people try to rewrite his mind for him. I went quiet. I kept my eyes on the folder while my hands stayed flat on the table, palms down, as if I were holding myself in place. Paper after paper, it was all there, already assembled, already organized, already moving. They had spoken to lawyers. They had spoken to a doctor. They had spoken to someone about my money. And they had done all of it without saying my name to my face. Dad, Laura said, leaning forward, softening her voice, we just need you to cooperate. Tomorrow we go in, we explain, and after that, everything will be easier. Easier. For them. I glanced toward the kitchen doorway and saw Mark's keys in his hand again, turning, like a man trying to grind down his own nerves. Ethan had stopped pretending to watch cartoons. He was staring at the floor now, jaw tight, like he wanted to shrink into himself. I looked back at the paperwork and something caught my eye, small details most people wouldn't notice. Dates. Signatures. The way a recommendation had been worded like a conclusion. The way my evaluation had been scheduled so quickly it couldn't have been a first conversation. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were building a file. When I finally spoke, my voice surprised even me. It was steady. Who has access to my accounts right now? Laura blinked. Dad, why are you jumping to that? I'm not jumping, I said. I'm asking. Mark leaned in, trying to sound reasonable. No one is stealing from you. You're not thinking clearly. That's exactly why we're doing this. There it was again, you're not thinking clearly, like a spell they could say to make my questions disappear. I nodded once, slowly, like I accepted it. Then I closed the folder and pushed it back toward Laura. I'll review this at home, I said. We'll talk tomorrow. Her face tightened for a fraction of a second. She didn't like at home. She didn't like me leaving with the documents. She didn't like anything that gave me time. But she forced a smile anyway. Of course. Take your time. And that's how I knew I was right. Because people who truly care about your safety don't panic when you ask for time. They don't panic when you want to read. They don't panic when you want privacy. On the drive home, my hands were steady on the wheel, but my stomach felt hollow, as if something inside me had dropped out and left an echo. The streetlights blurred slightly on the windshield. I could still hear Laura's calm voice in my head. Tomorrow the court, tomorrow the court, tomorrow the court. When I got home, I didn't sit down. I didn't even take off my jacket. I walked straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. Or tried to. My password didn't work. That simple red message on the screen hit harder than the folder had. Invalid credentials. I tried again, carefully, no shaking hands, no mistakes. Invalid credentials. I reset it using the secure steps I'd set up years ago, phone code, backup email, confirmation prompts. And when I got in, my chest went colder. There were attempted access requests. There were account linking attempts. There were trusted device approvals pending, devices that were not mine. Not completed. Not yet. But close enough to show intent. I opened my email and searched my inbox for keywords: legal, evaluation, guardian, attorney. My screen filled with threads I hadn't read closely before, messages that had been sitting there like dust, waiting for me to finally wipe them clean. Then I checked something I should have checked months earlier. My passwords. I went through every account that mattered: banking, insurance, retirement, my phone provider. One by one, I changed them. I turned on two-factor authentication. I removed any shared access. I locked down everything like I was sealing doors in a storm. Then I called the bank. The woman on the line was polite, trained, calm. The kind of calm that doesn't mean kindness, just procedure. "Sir, I do see there were attempts to add an authorized user," she said. "Who tried?" I asked. "I'm not allowed to disclose names unless I'm declared unfit," I finished quietly. There was a pause. Just long enough to tell me she understood exactly what I meant. I hung up and sat down for the first time that night. The house felt different once you know you're being hunted inside it. Every sound becomes suspicious. The furnace clicking on. A car passing outside. A floorboard settling. The neighbor's dog barking like it's warning you. My phone buzzed. Laura. I didn't answer. Then Mark. Then Laura again. Finally a text: "Dad, don't do anything drastic. You're upset. Just sleep. Sleep." As if this was a mood that would pass by morning. As if tomorrow wasn't already scheduled. That was when the threat started changing shape. Not direct, not obvious, because they wanted to stay clean. But sharp enough to cut. "We're only trying to help you. If you fight this, it'll look bad. If you don't cooperate, the judge will have no choice." No choice. They were telling me, in careful language, that my compliance was the only way to keep my dignity. And that's when I made my own choice. I started digging. Not with rage. Not with drama. With patience. Because if they had built a file on me, I could build one on them. I pulled phone records. I requested logs. I reviewed timelines. I wrote dates down on a yellow legal pad, old-fashioned, but reliable. I traced each move like a mechanic listening for the true source of a rattle. And slowly, the pattern surfaced. Conversations that weren't about my health. Appointments made before concern was spoken aloud. Plans laid out like steps, not worries. They had decided I was unfit before they ever tried to prove it. And the more I looked, the more I understood one brutal truth. This wasn't about my mind. It was about control. And somewhere beneath their calm voices, beneath their practiced pity, beneath every, for your own good, there was something else waiting. Something they didn't expect me to find. The truth. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed like it had no mercy, but emotionally. The kind of cold that settles in your bones when people are about to decide something about you, without asking you. I sat at the small table beside my lawyer, hands folded, spine straight, breathing slow. I had slept 2 hours the night before, not from fear, but from focus. I had read every page. Highlighted dates. Memorized sequences. I knew the story better than anyone in that room. Across from me, Laura dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she didn't need yet. Mark sat rigid, jaw locked, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were pale. They looked like victims preparing to be believed. The judge entered. Everyone stood. She was older than I expected. Gray hair pulled back neatly. Glasses low on her nose. Her eyes didn't rush. They measured. When we sat, she looked at Laura first. "Ms. Reynolds," she said calmly, "you may proceed." Laura's voice trembled on cue. She spoke about concern. About decline. About moments of confusion, exaggerated just enough to sound plausible. She talked about safety, vulnerability, responsibility. About how hard this had been for her as a daughter. She never once said she loved me. Then Mark spoke. More controlled. More clinical. He referenced doctors. Evaluations. Risk management. He spoke as if I were an asset that had started malfunctioning. When they finished, the judge nodded and turned to my lawyer. "Your response." My lawyer didn't stand immediately. He let the silence stretch, just a second longer than comfortable. Then he rose, adjusted his jacket, and spoke quietly. "Your Honor, this case is not about cognitive decline. It is about premeditated financial control." Laura's head snapped up. My lawyer began laying documents on the table, one by one. Not dramatically. Methodically. Emails. Text messages. Financial planning documents. Meeting notes with lawyers, dated before any alleged concern was ever raised with me. The judge leaned forward. "These messages," my lawyer said, "are not about care. They are about assets." He read a line aloud. Laura went pale. Another line. Mark shifted in his seat. A third. The courtroom grew still. "These plans," my lawyer continued, "were created while my client was fully independent, fully competent, and unaware that his own children were building a case to remove his autonomy." The judge looked directly at Laura. "Did you disclose these discussions to your father at the time they occurred?" Laura opened her mouth. Nothing came out. My lawyer wasn't finished. He introduced banking records, attempted access requests, unauthorized inquiries, draft guardianship filings. He showed how urgency had been manufactured, how emergency language appeared only after financial access was denied. Then something happened that none of us had planned. Ethan stood up. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. He just stood, hands trembling slightly, eyes fixed on the floor. "Your Honor," he said quietly. The judge blinked, surprised. "Young man, you need to sit." "He can speak," my lawyer said gently. "If the court allows." The judge studied Ethan for a long moment. Then nodded. "Go ahead." Ethan swallowed. "They didn't talk about Grandpa being sick," he said. His voice shook, but it didn't break. "They talked about money. About the house. About what would happen after." Laura turned toward him sharply. "Ethan." The judge raised her hand. "That's enough." Ethan looked at me then. Just for a second. And in his eyes I saw something that hurt more than any accusation. Relief. Like he'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. The judge leaned back in her chair. The room felt different now. Not loud. Not dramatic. Clear. After a long pause, she spoke. "This court finds insufficient evidence to declare the respondent mentally unfit." Laura gasped softly. "The petition for guardianship is dismissed." The sound wasn't applause. It was breath. Collective, released breath. The judge continued, her tone firm now. "I strongly advise all parties to reflect on the difference between concern and control." Her gavel struck once. Just once. It was over. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing, while something inside me finally unclenched. I had won. And in the same moment, I knew. I had lost my family forever. Laura didn't look at me when the judge finished speaking. Not once. She stared at the table as if it had personally betrayed her, as if the wood grain might suddenly rearrange itself and offer her a different ending. Mark's face went stiff, then empty, like a room after furniture has been hauled out too quickly. He gathered his papers with shaking hands, stacking them too neatly, the way people do when they are trying not to fall apart in public. No one said my name. That was the strangest part. We had just fought over my life, my mind, my freedom, and when it was over, I was no longer worth addressing. People began to stand. Chairs scraped. The quiet murmur of a courtroom resetting itself filled the space. A clerk called the next case. Another family stepped forward, carrying their own private disaster wrapped in manila folders. I remained seated for a moment longer than necessary. My lawyer leaned toward me. "It's done," he said quietly. I nodded. My body felt heavy, but not weak. Like something old had finally settled into place. When I stood, my legs held me without protest. Laura brushed past me without a word. Her perfume lingered in the air, sharp, expensive, out of place. Mark followed her, jaw tight, eyes fixed ahead. He didn't even pretend to look back. Ethan hesitated. He stood near the door, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders hunched the way they had been the night at the dinner table. He looked like a child who had wandered too far into an adult storm and survived it by accident. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. That he shouldn't have been there. That children shouldn't be used as witnesses in wars they didn't start. But all I said was, "You were brave." His eyes filled. He nodded once and then turned and ran to catch up with his parents. That was the last time I saw any of them. Outside, the air felt different. Sharper. Cleaner. Like rain had passed somewhere nearby, even though the sky was dry. I stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment, watching people hurry past, strangers with phones pressed to their ears, couples arguing softly, a man laughing at something on his screen. Life, again, moving forward without ceremony. I drove home slowly. Every red light felt longer than usual. Every street looked slightly unfamiliar, like I was seeing it through new eyes. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, but I didn't. Inside, the silence was absolute. No phone buzzing. No voices. No tension humming beneath the floorboards. Just the tick of the old clock in the hallway and the low, steady sound of my own breathing. I set my keys on the table and stood there, unsure what to do next. Winning doesn't feel the way people imagine. There was no triumph. No relief that bloomed into joy. Just a hollow space where something used to be, a shape that looked suspiciously like family. I made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Laura had placed that folder. The wood still bore a faint scratch from where she dragged it toward me. I ran my finger along it without thinking. I thought of birthdays I wouldn't attend. Holidays that would pass quietly. A grandson growing up without my voice in his memory except as a complication. I had protected myself. But the cost was final. That night, I slept poorly. Not from fear, but from grief, the slow, heavy kind that doesn't ask permission. I dreamed of my wife, standing in the doorway of the workshop, arms crossed, watching me with that familiar look that said she already knew what I was going to say. When I woke, the house felt too large. I didn't call anyone. No one called me. Days passed. Then weeks. The quiet settled into something almost manageable. I began to understand that losing people who only love your usefulness is not the same as being unloved. It is simply being seen, too late, but clearly. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I had won my freedom. I had lost my illusion. And somewhere between those two truths, I began, slowly, to breathe again. I didn't rush to fill the silence. For the first time in decades, no one needed anything from me. No calls asking for advice that wasn't wanted. No emergencies that were really just conveniences. No polite concern hiding an invoice. The house learned my new rhythm slowly. Mornings became quieter. I stopped making too much coffee. I stopped setting out extra cups by habit. I opened windows instead of the television and let the day announce itself. A week after the trial, I went back to my lawyer's office. Not to fight. Not to defend. To decide. We created a trust, clean, simple, deliberate. No confusion. No loopholes. No future misunderstandings. I chose one key holder. Ethan. Not because he had testified. Not because he had chosen sides. But because he hadn't chosen gain. He didn't know about it. I didn't tell him. Some things are better given quietly, like seeds planted where no one can trample them yet. The rest of the money went where it had always wanted to go, into work, into repair, into something useful. I reopened the workshop. Not as a business. As a place. The tools were exactly where I'd left them, patient as old friends. I cleaned slowly, methodically, letting my hands remember their language. Oil. Wood. Metal. Measurements that never lie. One afternoon, without planning it, I set up a small camera on the bench. I fixed an old drill and talked while I worked. Not teaching. Just explaining. My voice sounded strange to me at first, older, steadier, less eager to please. I uploaded the video. I didn't tell anyone. The next morning there were comments. You remind me of my grandfather. I wish someone had taught me this. Thank you for explaining it slowly. I sat back in my chair and read them twice. Needed. Not for money. Not for access. Not for what I could sign away. For what I knew. For what I could pass on without losing myself. The videos became a routine. Fixing. Explaining. Remembering. People wrote from everywhere. Young men. Young women. People who had lost fathers. People who had never had one. I answered when I could. The house felt smaller then. Warmer. Sometimes, late at night, I still felt the weight of what was gone. Family doesn't disappear quietly. It leaves echoes. But those echoes no longer told me I was failing. They reminded me I had survived. I was no longer someone waiting to be managed. I was a man who chose what came next. And that was enough. When you're poor, you're invisible. When you're rich, you're useful. It took me 70 years to understand that love never needs access codes, signatures, or court dates. Real care doesn't hurry you, doesn't scare you, doesn't call lawyers before it calls you. I lost my family the day I defended myself. But I found something quieter and more honest in return: dignity. I wake up knowing my life is still mine. My hands. My work. My choices. And that is not loneliness. That is freedom. Names, places, and details in this story have been changed to protect privacy. Now tell me honestly. Would you forgive this kind of betrayal? If stories about real life, real aging, and real awakenings matter to you, stay with me. Subscribe, and share your thoughts below.